And it is 12 noon. Welcome everyone to this month's Neovation webinar, Think Like a Marketer, Train Like an L&D Pro. So excited to have this. I was a marketer long before I got into L&D, so I'm really excited to see what Mike and Bianca are going to cover today. So let me just deal with a little bit of housekeeping and introduce myself. My name is Susan Harrell, and I'm the Director of Sales Enablement here at Neovation Learning Solutions, and it's my privilege to program these webinars for you to share knowledge and education and build some community around thinking and learning together. So Neovation, in case you don't know us, we're a full service L&D house. We have learning platforms like Smarter You and AutoLearn. We have custom learning solutions where we can build courses for you. And my 30-second plug is we're introducing a new product into the marketplace called Joy Suite, coming out very shortly, probably within the next 60 to 90 days. It is a knowledge management system as opposed to a learning management system, and it is quite revolutionary. So look forward to introducing that to you in the future, but you are not here to hear me talk about things. So let's get right into it. The session is being recorded, and we'll be sending that out to you, and I'm going to ask Mike and Bianca, excuse me, of course, for any resources that they can provide. In addition, that will be available on our website for you to be able to access, because I know in these webinars are usually so jam-packed with information that that you need to just slow it down and take it all in. So look forward to sending that out to you. There will be a survey question at the end of the webinar. If you would just take a second when it pops up on your screen after the webinar window closes to answer those few very short questions. It really helps both myself and our presenters learn how we did and learn what else you would like to see webinars about. And we'll have a question session at the end. We'll all be keeping our eye on the chat, so please put your questions in there, and we'll make sure that all your questions get answered. I have a couple questions that were sent in with people's registrations as well. So that's, I think, it for housekeeping. So let me introduce today's incredible presenters. First, we have Mike Taylor, who brings, I'm going to just hand the share back over to Mike here. There we go. So we have Mike Taylor, who brings over 20 years of experience helping organizations and learners thrive. He's not just a learning consultant, he is a dynamic speaker and a real influential voice in the L&D space. He's a faculty member at Franklin University, where he connects the big ideas with real world results. And if you haven't signed up for his weekly newsletter, you really need to do that. We'll make sure you have the link for that. He has a passion for making learning more engaging and effective, and he is absolutely contagious in his enthusiasm. And joining him is his co-author and friend, Bianca Baumann. She is a global L&D strategist with a knack for turning complex workforce challenges into smart and scalable solutions. With 15 years in the field, 15 plus years in the field, she's led award-winning projects across many industries, from finance to automotive, and helped countless organizations transform their onboarding, reskilling, and beyond. She's a respected speaker in education at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. So together, Mike and Bianca bring a powerful blend of strategy, creativity, and most importantly, real world insight to the table. So let's all get ready for an energizing and thought provoking session. And they'll be sharing insights today from their upcoming book, Think Like a Marketer, Train Like an L&D Pro, which is a real fresh take on strategies that will ignite learning and drive real impact. So welcome, Mike and Bianca. I hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Susan, for this very warm welcome. Super excited to be here. So I don't really want to add much more because Susan did such a great job introducing us here. And Mike, okay, looks like Mike is good too. So we'll jump straight in then, as Susan was saying, action-packed. It's really two things we, want to talk to you today about, which is, learner personas, and then Mike will talk about how we can actually leverage that knowledge to then write better for these for our target audience. So we try to keep this as interactive as possible. So using the chat, what do you know about learner personas? Let us know. I'm very curious to hear how much knowledge we have in our virtual room here. If I have some experts I can draw on, use the chat. Don't be shy. This is really your session, and we want to make sure you can get the most out of this. So what do you know about learner personas? And I'll just give everyone a moment to get their typing fingers ready. It's also lunch for some of you, so maybe you're just, putting some food in your mouth while I'm asking this question. You could also raise your hand if you know about learner personas. So this way I kind of get a feel for who's in the room. All right. I guess we have a really quiet audience today, Mike. So I guess we're just, oh, there we go. Should have said that earlier. Thank you, Jennifer, for rescuing me. Saved by the Bell, Jennifer Bell. I like that. They're a great tool to identify specifics about your target learners that can inform how best to present information, what to present, etc. Yeah, I love that. Great. I think Jennifer can actually take over here for me. All right, keep those questions, those answers coming. So, one thing I want to start us off with here is like when you're dealing with people, we really need to remember that we're not dealing with creatures of logic, but with creatures of emotion. And to bring that point across a little bit more, I want to tell you a story. What's really important to our learners. I worked for an agency. I still do, but that was a different agency. And we worked with an oil and gas client, and they had a goal called Goal Zero. So oil and gas, imagine these big plants, there's spills everywhere, there's ladders to climb up on, lots of danger everywhere, right? So Goal Zero means we're really trying to have no accidents in our plants. And sure, there was some training programs around that, but for some reason we couldn't quite get to zero accidents. There was always something. And so we thought about, okay, what else could we do? Clearly, logic doesn't work here. How about we speak to their emotions? So we asked these people in plants to put a picture of a loved one in an area that they, see every day, and we figured, well, if they don't want to be safe for themselves, because clearly logic didn't do the trick, how about we speak to their emotions? And when they see a picture of their loved ones, maybe they want to be safe for those loved ones, right? Could be a pet or a partner or whatnot. And it made a difference. We didn't still quite get to Goal Zero, but much, 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 much closer. So there were definitely less accidents and issues using that. And what I love about this is it wasn't a training initiative, right? We really just thought a little bit differently, and we really put our learners at the center of everything we're doing. All right. So what's really important when we design training is that we think about the human experience. And that experience should really be bottom up and personal. And what I mean by that is that, we're all familiar with the work-life balance, which will kind of fit into the bottom left corner there. And work-life balance is all about centered around work. So in the end, it's not really driven by our learners or by our employees. Work is still at the center. It's kind of the opposite of the human experience, the learner-centric design. Then came the employee engagement, which is, top left quadrant there, where, organizations started putting ping pong tables into offices. Not yet, Mike, not yet.
Oh, sorry.
Um, and yeah, ping pong tables into, lunchrooms. And it's like, oh, this is great if you like ping pong. But if you don't like ping pong, what are you going to do with this ping pong table? So it was still driven, the design of the workplace was still driven by the organization. And then we have employee-led, where it's really that, we looked at employee experience in the bottom right corner there. And the employee experience is all about new processes and new workflows. So we finally started thinking about putting the learner at the center. But where we really, really want to go to is, employee-led and personal. So that's in that top right corner. And usually I ask the question, but Mike just revealed it, which is okay. So you can go to the next slide. The question you want to answer for your employees, for your learners is, am I making a difference? If you can answer that question, I don't want to say it's the secret, but maybe it's close to that, because it really helps you understand who your learners are. If they can answer the question, am I making a difference at work, to society, to my community, to my coworkers, right? Am I making a difference? Really, really important. I want to tell you another story about Jane and Cassandra. So Jane and Cassandra, we're looking at these fabulous women here, both high-performing first-level manager. They both lead an IT development project at a Fortune 500 company. They both live in New York City. They're both 41 years old, and they both have two children under the age of 5. So what's the story here, you wonder? Well, on the surface, it looks like Jane and Cassandra are the same person. So we were designed for them exactly the same way. However, if we look at their motivations, they're motivated by two very different things. Motivated by success, recognition, and financial well-being in Jane's case. And Cassandra, she's more motivated by purpose and solving difficult problems and leading more of a balanced lifestyle. So if you look at that, are these two women still the same? Probably not, right? We have to think differently. So what's really important is to cater to motivations at that individual level and really, really unleash that potential of each person. So if we're digging a little bit deeper, we talked about the motivation just now, and I also had that story beginning of our session around the emotions. And if you look at the overlap between motivations and emotions, that is where behavior is happening. And as good learning and development professionals, that is where the rubber hits the road, right? This is where we want to better understand our learners, because in the end, we are designing for behavior change. We're not designing to check a box that someone sat through the training. I know we're still doing that, but we shouldn't, right? We should really focus on what is that behavior change. So what that means is we need to customize the design of and the experience of not just learning, but the work and the workforce practices itself. So it really, goes a little bit broader than just our learners and our learner personas. But speaking of learner personas, how can we customize for, the work and the work environment and the worker is, well, I just added learner personas, and I asked you guys about, your experience with those. So learner personas are research-based, a research-based representation of your typical learner, and they really help us support human-centric design. And when you create learner personas, you're looking at like 6 different areas usually. So you want to look at, what do learner personas see? What do they hear, do, think, and feel? And what are their needs and their pain points? So let's go through these real quick. And also, before I actually go through these, you'll probably see multiple templates for learner personas, and they all cover kind of different things and focusing on different things. We're going to show you a finished persona in a moment, but it all depends on your organization, on what you really want to focus on. These are my 6 buckets that I like to use in addition to demographic information. But when we talk about the C, it's really like, what do our learners, our employees see every day, no matter if they're in a home office, if they are in an actual office, if they're traveling on the road, what do they see? And it's not just about training, it's what do they see in general, right? It could be what they see from their coworkers. It could be, of course, what they see when they log into the LMS, but what other systems do they see? Hear, what do they hear? It's not about listening to music, although that could be part of it. So we know a little bit more about what motivates them. But it's really, what do they hear from their colleagues? What do they hear from their managers? What do they hear from their clients if they're client facing? All of that will give us insight into their day-to-day. Do is kind of self-explanatory. That is the job description, right? However, often you can't just use the job description and say this is what they do every day. I do like to ask the question. One of the first questions I like to ask when I do interviews is like, tell me about yourself. People love talking about themselves. They can go on and on and on, right? But you learn so much about them when you ask that question. And then based on the see and hear and do, and really, really good listening skills and reading in between the lines, you can get to the think and feel. How do they think about certain things? How do they feel about certain things? So questions I like to use to, complete each of these 4 buckets is, aside from, who are you, and what do you do every day, is really, what makes you get up in the morning? What delights you? What are some of the challenges you're seeing, right? And so automatically, you see there are generic questions, but automatically learning will come up. because everyone knows we're here to learn a little bit more about their learning environment. You would set up the interview that way. But what happens often when you ask them about what they think and feel, they start venting, right? So you just got to make sure you kind of contain it. Give them the space, it's important, but bring them back in as needed. And then once you have those four buckets, you can synthesize the needs and the pain points for each of those learner personas. Okay. So what's the process? And as I go through this, please put questions into the chat, right? You don't have to wait until the end. But there's 3 steps to create learner personas. First, you've got to get the information. I already mentioned interviews a couple of times. My favorite. I like to, for one learner persona, I like to get 10 to 15 learners roughly, because then I start seeing trends and similarities. And I interview them. I meet with them for 30 minutes, and I have an AI note taker in the virtual room. And this way I can really focus on the person in front of me. And I ask them, what do you do? What does your day look like? What delights you? What are some challenges? What are some, if you want to have a training specific question, what are some of the training initiatives you really enjoyed, you didn't enjoy? How do you like to learn outside of work, right? So usually 5 to 6 questions, and just make sure you ask the same questions to all the learners so you can compare apples to apples. What often happens is that if you talk to your stakeholders and say, hey, I want to do learner interviews. Okay, now I need 10 to 15 people for one learner persona. We usually do between 3 to 5 personas. That's a lot of time for people off the floor that they're not working, right? And so sometimes you might get a bit of a pushback there. So what you could do instead of interviews is surveys. They're not as great because it's harder to ask follow-up questions, right? But it's kind of the next best thing. And I know I skipped observations. Observations are great for certain roles. For knowledge workers, it's obviously a little bit harder because, if you're working on your computer all day long and someone is just looking over your shoulder, it's a little bit creepy. But, if you think about, someone client facing in a dealership or some kind of a client facing selling environment, it's a little bit easier to watch what they're doing. Another option is to do focus groups. Focus groups allow me to get, 4 or 5 people into a room at the same time. I would usually then book a good hour though with those people, so we just have more time to go through the same 5 to 6 questions. But sometimes that's also a little bit easier to get stakeholders to agree to focus groups. And then the most important thing is data. So everything I do needs to be supported by data. When I say data, I mean LMS, LXP data, HRIS, employee surveys, usage data you might get from your IT department, Google Analytics, anything you can get your hands on to support the research you're doing. Once you have all of that, now you analyze that information, you look for similarities and trends and outliers. And let me tell you, I don't even know how we did this before AI, but now it's so much easier to actually analyze information. Obviously, we, scrape anything that is identifiable information, but then having the AI actually analyze that information, and then you create the persona. So you aggregate all the information. Really important to confirm with your learners that this is, or that they see themselves in that learner persona, and then you roll them out, you integrate them into your design, and you make sure that you're actually using them. And again, Mike is going to talk a little bit more about this in just a moment. But yeah, that's kind of the process here. Another question I started adding just recently is actually, why do you work? I should actually say, why do you work, not why do I work? But as the person answering, like, why do I work? And I know sometimes it's not as exciting an answer. It might just be, well, because I have bills to pay. And that's okay. If you think back to Jane and Cassandra, right? One of them was motivated just by money, and that's okay. But there might be other motivations. So we should just not assume that it's just to make more money. So ask that question. Why do you work? Why are you here? And here's a, a finished persona. As Susan was saying, we're going to share this deck with you after, so no worries to take any screenshots. But, this is just an example of what this looks like. So you have some demographic information there on the top, and then the 6 buckets I was actually talking about. And, as you look at this after, you can kind of see how we synthesize the pain points and the needs out of what we're seeing and hearing and or what Jordan sees and hears and does and thinks and feels. Okay. So once you have your learner personas, there's really 3 ways of how you can customize and your designs and your learning programs. The first one is the easiest in terms of, no, let me rephrase that. The first one is the cheapest, but not necessarily the easiest, because a manager-driven approach means you need a manager who's really, really good in people development, right? But if as a manager, I know exactly who sits in front of me and what they're motivated by, I can adjust my coaching style. I can adjust, what they need. I can give them stretch assignments or whatnot, but it needs a really good manager. The other option is more of a modular approach. I just mentioned stretch assignments, right? It could be that you look at, hey, where is there other projects within the organization that I know I can bring this person in and they will actually really be excited about doing something else for 4 or 6 weeks because they're helping somewhere else. So it's more of that modular approach, like not thinking about this is your job and this is what it is, but where can you bring other pieces, other modules in? This could also be looked at more from a learning perspective, and you could say, okay, modular approach means, I have 10 modules, 10 e-learning modules in total, but depending on what my persona needs, they would only take 4 or 5 of those. And that kind of ties into the tech-driven approach, which really now with AI, we're able to personalize a lot of our learning path and our learning experience much, much more. And, tell the AI systems like, if it's this persona, show XYZ. If it's that persona, show, something else. Right. So now that you know a little bit more about personas, how can you envision using them in your organization? And thank you, Susan. Don't be shy. If you have questions, drop them in the chat and we're happy to talk about it. But yeah, now that you know a little bit more, and this was really only 20 minutes, Mike knows I can talk about this 8 hours, which we're not going to do, obviously. But yeah, any thoughts on where you would use personas before I give it over to Mike? Right? Well, Mike, I think you can jump in and then I can just chat to people if they drop some answers into the chat there.
All right. Well, we're gonna help them out a little bit because we're going to talk this next section. Once you've learned and gone through this process of analysis and research in the persona process, well, then what do we do with that when it comes to creating our content? So we're going to kind of give you a little bit of the answers, and then we'll give you another chance. We'd love to hear your thoughts once we get through that. But I have to start off with a bit of a news flash. For some of us, it may not be as much as a news flash for others, but people aren't sitting around and waiting for us to put something new in the LMS. Nobody wants to read our stuff. But don't take it personally because nobody wants to read anything. We can all probably relate to the sometimes large amount of things we get, and you think, why are they sending this to me, right? Like it's just, and then you hit delete and you don't even know what is in it. So when we're designing our learning, when we're armed with the knowledge that we've just accumulated and acquired from doing the learner personas, there's sort of 3 big things that we can do when we go to create our content that can really sort of upgrade that for everybody. And the first one is super simple that anybody can do today. When we leave here, this is something you could do in a half an hour. And that is to start with great titles. So headings and titles have a huge impact on the effectiveness of your content. If you think about it, 80% on average of people will read the title, but only about 20% go beyond that. And so I learned this lesson. I spent a couple years as an articulate community manager. Writing blog posts was one of my jobs, and I was very excited. I wrote my very first blog post. I was very excited about it. And I sent it off to my boss, Tom Kuhlman, and he sent it back in about 2 seconds, and it just had a bunch of Z's. He's like, this is boring. I'm like, I hadn't even thought of that, but it's really such an important point. If you can't hook their interest and make it interesting and relevant to them in the title, your odds of them seeing the rest of it go way down. And so what titles do, there's three big important jobs that titles have for us. The first one, like I mentioned, is capture attention. That first impression is really important, and it actually colors the rest of what comes after that. It has impacts for trust and credibility and even usability based on that first impression. It sets expectations, and like I said, it sort of frames how the content is perceived if they do go on to dig into it. And then hopefully our ultimate goal there is, it drives action. It determines whether they're going to continue with the rest, or if they're going to say, oh, this is out of here, this is not for me. There's a couple of really great tools that are great for helping you, analyze your current titles and then get better at writing new ones. So it's kind of like going in the batting cage and practicing your swing, but with titles. So CoSchedule has one. Of course, these now are all infused with AI. You'll put in your title, it'll give you a score, and it'll give you some feedback. So, good parts, bad parts, how you can improve it. And it's kind of fun to see, if you can get a score, and they're usually color coded. If you can get your score up into the greens, which are like, 70 and 80, then that's the goal. And sometimes it's hard. Share Through has another one. And again, these both work similar. And we're going to give you all of this stuff at the end, so don't feel like you have to scribble these down. So like I said, it's kind of like batting practice for writing headlines and titles, and it's helped me a lot by using these. And once you do it, you're going to get good, and you'll notice a noticeable difference, because there's a lot of things you'll learn from using these tools that will help you improve your titles. So we start with a great title. The second thing is, in the book, we have an acronym called SURE. So we use the SURE principles. So let's unpack that a little bit and see what exactly we're talking about. So the S is for simple. Our brains crave simple, clear information, and a large part of that is readability. So another easy thing that you could do today is to go take some of your existing content, your scripts, whatever you have, and run it through a readability test, readability checker. It's built into Word, there's online versions. And readability is often a good proxy for learnability. So when you're going through this process, what that looks like is we're looking for ways we can reduce the amount of text and the complexity of text. So if you are reading something and there's a whole bunch of 3 or 4 syllable words in there, those are good candidates to look for simpler words that can replace those big complicated words. Flesh reading E-score is something that's built into Word. This is a pretty standard thing to use to rate your readability. There are others. This is probably the dominant one. The higher the score, the easier it is to read. So you see Dr. Seuss is up there around 100. Harvard Law Review is down around 20 or 30. An insurance policy is 12. We can all relate to what that looks like and how difficult those are to read. In the US, the average reading level is about 7th to 8th grade. So depending on your audience, that level of writing is going to be accessible to the widest, biggest, largest size of audience. So that's a good target for most general audiences. So we have simple. The second piece, another thing very important is it useful? What I like to say oftentimes, if you're writing things that are one size fit all, it usually means that it's one size fit none. And so anything you can do to ditch generic content and write for specific learner problems, this is how marketers target their customer needs. And this is great information that you can get from the personas that Bianca was just talking about. The R is resonate. So this is emotionally resonant. So emotions are like a flag for our brain to pay attention. So emotions create learning that stick. Facts and figures just don't quite cut it. If we think about it, let's just use a marketing example here to kind of illustrate the differences between typical L&D and marketers. So let's say we work at Subaru and we want everybody to know that our cars are safe. Most of us, or a lot of us, would intuitively think, okay, I've got data and logic and charts and facts and figures, and I can show that, hey, our crash test numbers are great and our cars are safe. But the thing that marketers know, and not all training people do, is it's not the logic that drives behavior. The emotions are what really drive our behavior much more. And if we kind of say, okay, well, what does that look like? What do marketers do to tap into that emotion? I want to share with you a little short 30-second Subaru ad. And I want you, while you're watching this, to compare it to what the experience of the video is versus the experience of the charts and the facts and the figures and the data overload version. So I'm going to see if I can get the audio to share. It looks like my share audio is not here. So I'm going to give you a link. I'm going to give you this link in chat. If you could pop that open, it takes about 30 seconds. So I want you guys to watch that video and then just give us a thumbs up or something when you're back. And then we'll talk about it. Yeah, Heather, car commercials are often good ones. Subaru has great advertising and marketing team. They've got a lot of good ones. Yeah, good comment, Jennifer. Simple messaging, super effective. And we'll talk about that. Yeah, exactly. Emotional, right? So we'll give folks a few more moments to finish. Yeah, thank you, Lindsay. Awesome, thanks, Sonia. Right? It does. You can actually feel that. And so if we compare and contrast that emotional and the feeling of the shivers versus somebody giving you a lot of data and charts and that sort of stuff, you can sort of easily see the contrast of that and imagine what the effectiveness of that is. And the reason I love this example is it's essentially two words, and it's another example of the visuals really carrying the message. When you see that car that's smashed beyond recognition and the family walks out and we lived, it's also an example that this doesn't require expensive tools or learning some new skill. It's really just a perspective and a mindset shift. And when you start to look at that and apply that to your learning, it's free and it can have a huge impact with just a small change of your perspective and shifting your mindset there. So the last one here, easy to skim, easy to process. This is things like using white space, visual hierarchy, chunking. We're all familiar with chunking our content and the value of that, bite-sized chunks. Using visuals, can you use a visual or a chart to replace a massive wall of text? And so those are all cognitively easier to process, easy to skim visually. And here's a good example of that. So imagine you've got instructions for installing a smart refrigerator. So here might be kind of a typical not using those principles that we're talking about example. And then if we compare and contrast those two versions, which of those two versions, if you were the installer doing that job, which of those two versions would you want to work from? A on the left or B on the right? Right? Yeah, for sure. And it's really, it's not even close because we're applying all of those things. It's scannable, it's got white space, it's got visual hierarchy. When we go back to the readability factor that we talked a little bit ago, that first version's got almost 300 words and a score of in the 30s, whereas the second version has almost a third of the words and twice the score. So the reading ease score is 60. And so that's helping people be able to process what you're giving them much more easily. And if you're familiar with cognitive load, that one on the right is going to be much better in terms of the cognitive load that people are dealing with. So we've got titles, we've got those sure principles, and this is the last one is another simple one that you could start implementing right away. You've seen this probably a million times from marketers. They always close with a call to action. And so what they're doing is they're just telling you what they want you to do next. And they're not going to leave it to chance that you've got to translate or interpret something. And it changes this passive consumption into active action. The simple fact of just giving some clear direction of what to do and how it benefits them, right? So the what's in it for them is an important part of a good call to action. And this is something simple that you could do today with existing content very quickly and easily. So those are the three big things. Now I'm curious if there's anything of those that I was just talking about that stands out, anything maybe Bianca was talking about, which one of these will you try first? And if there's more than one, that's great. We'd love to hear that too. Yeah, Karen, more images. That's a good one. And then with images, it's important that we make sure those are relevant. We don't want to fall into the trap of what I call it just decorating. So we want the image to serve a learning purpose when we use those. So sometimes less is more with images as well. Yeah, titles. The title, Ray, those are fun to play with. We do workshops and we give people boring compliance titles and see who can come up with the highest score on those. Those are really fun to do. Yeah, more emotion and training. Excellent. Thanks. Thanks, Kim. Questions, comments, anything at all so far? Yeah, subject lines and titles and headlines. Yeah, those are fabulous. Yeah, and Susan, that raises a really good point. The clickbaity part, this is something we hear often, is like, well, I don't want to be spammy and clickbaity and it feels kind of slimy. And that's really not the point. You still need to be able to deliver the value. So the hook up front is to get them in. If you don't have the value and the things that they need that are relevant, then it doesn't matter how good your titles are because they're going to say, oh, this is from Susan and she always writes the clickbaity titles. But if there's not value behind it, they're going to catch on to that pretty quick. So we've still got to give the value and we still have to deliver. Yeah, Kim's going to try personas first. That's awesome.
And there's two questions, actually, if I may jump in here around
please.
persona. So they're very similar from Peter and Amory. Any tips on, when you have different personas, how do you address them in a single training? I like to think about it as you have one tale that you tell two different ways. And what I mean by that is if you imagine a learner journey, it goes from 1 to 10. There's 10 steps that someone would have to go through in order to learn something or do something differently. You would design the entire journey and then you overlay the personas and say, okay, persona A only needs steps 1, 3, and 7 versus the other persona needs 5, 6, and 7, right? I'm just making this up. So you're not reinventing the wheel. You really use, ideally, if you can, technology as much as possible to give the learner personas what they need, but you would design, one experience and just push push out certain content. From a facilitation perspective, a little bit harder to do it. However, what you could do is, if you think about breakout sessions in your facilitation, that's where you could have specific examples that speak to one persona over the other persona, right? So those are just some tips and tricks and tactics that you could use. Great questions.
Awesome. Any other comments or questions at this point? Cool. And as Susan said, I think everybody who registered will get a copy of the slides and links of the recording and all that stuff. So that's going to be, I'll give you a chance to grab it here as well. So if we think about all of those things that we're talking about, really, if we boil that down, personas, to get to know your audience, we want to know our audience as well as possible. And then we can use that information to do all those things that we talked about, right? What's relevant to them? What do they care about? What's going to grab their attention? So it's hard to grab people's attention if you don't know what they care about and you don't know your audience very well. And if we can do those two things well, then we're much more likely to deliver good results for our organization. And those results are ultimately what we're after for. So it's a combination of the attention to drive the action, and that's where we're shooting for. So Susan mentioned our book. It's available. You can order that now. It'll be out on May 27th. So I believe if you order it now, you'll get it on May 27th. So that's there. I'm gonna pull up this last slide here to hopefully prompt some conversations. If you have your phone handy, you can use that QR code to grab a copy of the slides, links to the title analyzers, all the stuff we talked about. And I'll also drop a link into the chat if you want to grab it that way. So we'll pull Bianca back in here and looking for some folks to finish one of these questions that we've prompted you with. Heather's going to make an effort to better understand that. Excellent, Heather. Awesome.
And sometimes that all it takes. Like you know, it's ideally you do the research-based learner personas, but if you can think about learner before content, that's a huge win, including your subject matter experts and stakeholders. Are we going to get one last one? Thanks, Carl. I'm going to start using the headline analyzers for my RISE courses. I liked it. I like it. Jennifer says, I learned a new approach to personas with your 6 questions. Great presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, the headline analyzers are actually fun. Sometimes I have a great title and I get stuck just because I'm having so much fun and I keep trying to get higher and higher score. Yeah, Peter, that's a good one. Appeal to the learner's emotions. And like I mentioned earlier, it's a mindset shift that you can, I'm always stealing ideas from commercials and ads like, oh, I can use this idea or this trick, technique that they used. And it's really, really good. Yes, so the book is available through the ATD website. I know there is some Canadian booksellers, so I'm pretty sure it is available just about anywhere that books are sold. So all of the different countries of Amazon, I think, work. ATD is one as well. I think if you're an ATD member, you get a discount. So it's like somewhere around 10%, 5 to 10%. No, thanks. Bianca put those in the chat there if you don't see it.
And I love that Carl is going to buy a Subaru now. Like, that's fun.
They have great commercials. They have a lot of good dog commercials, pets, and they're just really, really good. So we've got time. This is your time for questions. Anything for us? I know personally, I always think of my very best questions, right after I hang up from the meeting. So Bianca and I are both easy to find on LinkedIn. Happy to take questions there. Please feel free to reach out. We're happy to talk about this stuff or answer any questions or help in any way that we can.
And Peter, to answer your question, so there's, kind of starting with why marketing and learning. We talk a little bit about attention and how the brain works. Very, very high level because we're not scientists. And then the learner personas, we talk learner personas, content strategy, learner journeys, visuals, writing better copy, learning campaigns, technology, and measurement and data. So many, many, many more topics that we didn't cover today.
Yeah, there's a lot of marketing technology that translates really, really well to a L&D learning context. And so we have a chapter in there on those as well.
And Carl, good question. How to persuade clients to spend the time to make personas? I like to use an example if you want to Google that. Doug Dietz. So he actually, it's a design thinking example, but Doug Dietz was asked to create an MRI scanner, which he did. But the first version meant that children had to be like more than 80% of children had to be sedated because he didn't think about everyone in his target audience. He only thought about a male, white male who would go into the MRI scanner. And he went back to the drawing board and created like a pirate adventure. So that's always like a nice, and then sedation rate went down to less than 8%. And so that's always a nice example to make stakeholders understand the importance of knowing your audience and designing for your audience. If you can't get to research-based, at a minimum, I like to call it rapid persona creation. Get some stakeholders in the room and make some assumptions, which is not great, but at least get access to data. And as I mentioned earlier, if you get them to think persona or learner before content, then it's already a win. So those are some small steps you might have to take in order to get to full-on research-based personas. Okay.
Yeah, I see another question. Karen has a question about writing for 7th grade reading level without alienating people. And I think it's not really dumbing things down. It's making things more accessible and easier to process cognitively. Obviously, knowing your audience is important there. So if my audience is completely made up of, technical engineers, I may sort of aim up a little higher up that scale because I know, their background and their reading level is probably higher. But, I think it's really important how easily can we process that information with less effort. So it's the cognitive load angle and not so much of a dumbing down. I know when I read things, I appreciate less text, shorter sentences, simpler words. So that's what I would say about that. And I wouldn't worry too much about alienating other people.
And there's a question around an LMS that uses AI to customize learning pathways based on personas. That's a loaded question. So first off, be careful and ask the right questions when a vendor says they have AI support, because it might just be an automation. That's why I think Carl said Zapier makes you happier. So, ask the right questions to understand what's underneath the hood. I haven't heard an LMS that actually you feed personas in and then it gives you the path. It's, if anything, it would be built based on skills or competencies, which you can pull out of the learner personas. But I don't think there's an LMS that says, here's the learner persona, here's what you have to do. So you have to do some extra steps in between. But yeah, most important question to ask vendors is explain your AI to me. How does it work? Because often you'll find it's just an automation, which nothing wrong with it. It might still do the trick, but yeah, just
Yeah,
You,
I actually spoke to a vendor like that yesterday, and the high level sales pitch sounds amazing, but you have to dig into, what are the inputs? So it's kind of the idea of garbage in, garbage out. So how does it happen is a really important question, and how are you identifying skills? And so it's really important to get down into the details of that stuff because they're sort of cropping up, new ones every day, it seems, with all of the AI outburst of stuff that's happening.
yeah, we just came across a client of ours, and I'm not going to mention the platform, they signed a big contract with a sales enablement AI platform just to find out that most of the things that were told during the sales pitch, the platform actually cannot do. And now we're in the middle of this disaster, but we'll figure it out because we always do. Yeah, it is sad and even worse, as Cara's saying, it's very typical. Yeah, it's very, very unfortunate. So we got to be smarter and ask the right questions. And don't be shy, push them. If they don't have an answer, there's probably a reason that they don't have an answer.
And the thing about AI technology, if I can just jump in, is that it's evolving so quickly.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, definitely talk to your vendors and make sure you're comparing apples to apples because that's what we find often when we're talking to people that they struggle to compare features because the vendors are not talking about the final step or the final output. They're talking about all the shiny bells and whistles on top as opposed to what they're actually going to get at the end. So
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. I've written a few blog posts about how to buy an LMS. So
Yeah.
it's a journey.
It is. Ray, I don't have any resources on how to equate and build the automation based on persona. I think um, it's a very customized response depending on what your personas are, who your personas are, what kind of skills and competencies you pull out, what kind of content you have, how you map the whole thing. Um, I think if you read through the book, there's some kind of a resource there in terms of, once you read through all the chapters, you'll be able to do it. But unless Mike has anything, I don't have anything quick and dirty that just allows you to do that. It's, Zapier can help you in kind of like if this, then that. But the this and the that is very, very, very specific to each organization. But Mike, please jump in if I'm
Yeah.
missing
Yeah,
something.
yeah. So if you're familiar, if you've worked with um, ChatGPT or Claude or any of the big leading AI tools, most of them will have what they call projects. And so you can take your persona information and you can upload that as resources. And so if you're using that to create content, you can refer and you say write for the information you found in your personas. So you can reference that when you're writing, and that would give a different context based on the information in your personas. And then you can also use that um, for what's relevant to each persona. So not everything's going to be relevant to every persona. So you can also sort of use that to personalize stuff. And that would be my first step, was to put my data into a project and then reference those materials to get to that point.
I like that. And then maybe you can have some kind of, again, automation with your LMS that, you then can push that content accordingly. But yeah, there is not a quick fix. There are many, many, many steps you have to take to get there at the moment, at least.
And yeah, Susan, I think two is plenty. So she's asking about, being overrun, because it is overwhelming, because it feels like there's 100 new AI tools every day. And so I think it's good to experiment, but it's just dipping your toes in and experiment for what you need to do, because I am on some newsletters and I just open them and I close them. I'm like, I can't even process it because there's so many new ones every day. Uh, I love Claude. I pay for ChatGPT also. So I pay for both of those because the paid versions, in my experience, have been that much better that it's worth $20 a month. Um, and then Notebook LM is another great place where you can upload documents into it and then have it give you results based on the information you're putting in. So that's another great resource. And then that also goes, I have to leave the caveat of be careful what you're putting in there. You don't want to put the, Coke doesn't want to put the recipe for Coke in there because now it's out in the world, and if you have sensitive information and things that should stay secure, you've got to pay attention to that as well.
As we are coming close towards the end of our time, just to make sure everybody has time to ask their final questions as we start looking at potentially wrapping up our session today. I do want to just slide in again another 30-second commercial. Neovation is working on an AI-infused knowledge management platform for online training that will be launching in the next little while. So please watch for announcements on that. I think it may help answer some of the questions that that we're discussing today um, around how AI and a solid platform can solve some of these problems. Just to slide that in there. Um, but definitely there are so many tools. For me, the big takeaway in this, as a person who came from marketing into learning and development, just as I give people a chance to think of their final questions, is the reconnection of emotion to training content. I think that is so valuable. And when I first started working in L&D, training was all about just training outcomes, training results, ticking the box. Did people attend? Did they take the course? Did they finish the course? Did they pass the test? It was all numbers driven. And for me, online training or in-person training was always about the human result, the emotion at the end of it, because we never know the lives we save or the people that we advance in their lives or move forward in their journey because of the good training that we offer online and in person, that the training we offer touches people in ways that we will never see. We might see the rate of accidents in a workplace, but we'll never see the accidents that were not made. So I think that there's a strong emotional component that compels us to offer the best training that we can. So I see no other questions popping into the chat. I would like to thank Mike and Bianca for today's session. This reminded me of a lot of the marketing basics that I learned many years ago and their application into our L&D world. I look so forward to the book coming out. We'll be sending out the recording. We'll include all of the resources and a few others that I thought of along the way as we were going through things. So watch for that. Probably headed your way tomorrow. In an email from Neovation, you have Mike's QR code to get the slides and some resources in advance of that. But Mike Bianca, thank you so much. Good luck with your book as it gets launched out into the world. Your ideas are so valuable and will make such an impact on the L&D community. I celebrate your success and thank you for sharing your time and your wisdom with us today.
Thank you, Susan. Thanks for inviting us and letting us share the stage with you a little bit today.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was great. And thanks to the audience as well. Really appreciate everything.
Absolutely. So we have webinars scheduled every month. The next one is on leadership in learning and development. The one after that will be on customizing prompts in the L&D world. So that's going to be a whole workshop session with members from our custom content creation team, sharing some of the practices that they use to create great content. And again, watch for the Joy KMS launch, Joy Suite, headed your way soon. So we'll leave it on that note. Thanks again, and have a great day. The survey will pop up when you close your window. Please take a second to answer that, and we appreciate you being here and sharing your time with us. Thanks, everyone.